Hey everybody, it's Alan Gerding, Professor Gerding for psychology, social psychology. Again, this is part 2 of our social psychology video series. And last we left off, we were talking about the Stanley Milgram experiment. And I believe last we left off, some overweight white guy got fried by your hands. And we asked, who's to blame? You for hitting the switch? Or Stanley Milgram for telling you to hit the switch because this is a true experiment? And suddenly we got cut off because the software I'm using is free. But also, it's only lasts for 15 minutes. I'd have to upgrade to the full version to record more than 15 minutes, but anyway. So, who was to blame? A lot of people would say Stanley Milgram's definitely to blame because he's the one who set up this sick scenario. And remember, true story, this happened. This is why it's an infamous experiment. But other people think it's definitely the participant because they're the one who pulled the trigger. But would you believe me if I told you that some people believe it's the learner's fault? Remember the learner's the overweight gentleman who was strapped to the chair? Some people blame him because he understood the experiment and he was strapped to the chair and he participated willingly. But some people argue it's not his fault. The moment that he said, I have a heart condition, is this going to be a problem? And Stanley Milgram said, probably not. Then that's when the blame went more to Stanley Milgram. But some people think, well, even then, this guy should have said, probably not. What the hell, man? I said I have a heart condition. You should let me out of here. I'm not going to do this. This experiment's not worth my life. So, yeah, is he to blame? But I have an even more important question. Would you help? Would you help them? You're walking by and you see some guy strapped to a chair screaming his ass off. Let me out of here. Would you actually stop and help him? I think a lot of us would say yes, but again, that's really easy for us to say because we're just listening to this right now. You're probably even sitting down as you're listening to this. But think about all the times you drive by and you see potentially dangerous situations or even walking on the street. Because in your mind at that time, you're just trying to get from point A to point B. Maybe you're thinking about the groceries or some assignment you have yet to do or how the day went last night. I don't know. I'm not judging. But you're probably not thinking, if I see anyone in trouble on my way to wherever the hell I'm going, I'm totally going to help them out. No, it's an inconvenience out of our day. Plus, you don't know what's going on. Is this some joke? Am I being punked? Is this candid camera? What's going on? Or I don't want to get involved. You don't know. Would you help? So it's really easy for us to say that now, but if you're in the actual situation, would you? Because again, throughout this chapter, I want you to imagine you're in these situations to see how you think you'd actually do it. And it's really impossible because we probably don't know unless we're in those situations. So let's talk about something even more serious than the Stanley Milgram. And don't worry, we'll come back to Stanley Milgram, but something more serious. Let's talk about the story of Kitty Genovese. Some people pronounce it Kitty Genovese. I've heard it Kitty Genovese. There's a right way out there. I'm sorry if I'm doing it the wrong way, but I've been told Kitty Genovese all my life. But 1964, it's a true story, and I really can't do the story justice, so I'm just going to read it to you. It's available in your PowerPoints if you're in my class and you have it, but that's an actual picture of Kitty Genovese. And again, trigger warning, this isn't a good story. It involves murder, it involves rape. It's really horrific. Here we go. This is the actual story, 100% true. It was about 3:20 a.m. on Friday, March 13th, 1964, when 28-year-old Kitty Genovese returned home from her job managing a bar. Like other residents in her middle-class New York City neighborhood, she parked her car at an adjacent railway road station. Her apartment entrance was only 100 feet away. Just 100 feet. I want you to imagine that. It's, like a driveway or... Anyway, as she got out of her car, she noticed a man at the end of the parking lot. When the man moved in her direction, she began walking toward a nearby police call box. For those of you that don't know, police call box, those are those phones that directly connect you to the police, which was under a street light in front of a bookstore. The whole point is that it was well lit. On the opposite side of the street was a 10-story apartment building. As she neared the streetlight, the man grabbed her and she screamed. Across the light, lights went on in the apartment building, so people are definitely hearing what's going on. "Oh my God, he stabbed me! Please help me," she screamed. True story. One guy leaned out the window and said, "Let that girl alone!" He yelled from an upper apartment window. So the attacker looked up, then walked off, leaving Kitty on the ground bleeding. This is actually the most disturbing part of the story for me, is not so much as got stabbed, because that's horrific, but this guy walked away. I would hope that if I have someone assailing me, stabbing me, that they'd have some adrenaline going through their system, not as if this is just a regular thing they do every day. But the fact this guy just nonchalantly walked away is really creepy. This is horror movie stuff here, and yet it's a true story, unfortunately. So the street became quiet, and minutes passed. One by one, lights went off. So the people that turned on their lights because they heard the commotion, now they're turning them off. Struggling to her feet, Kitty made her way toward her apartment. As she rounded the corner of the building, a moment later, her assailant returned, stabbing her again. I'm dying, she screams. Again, lights went on, windows open, and people look out. This time the assailant got into his car and drove off. It was now 3:35 a.m. 15 minutes had passed since Kitty's first screams for help. A New York City bus passed by with passengers in it. They're looking at her out of the window, staggering then crawling. Kitty moved toward the entrance of her apartment. She never made it, though. Her attacker returned, searching the apartment entrance doors, systematically going from one stoop to the next, basically going to these different entrances. And at the second apartment entrance, he found her slumped at the foot of the steps. This time, he stabbed her to death, then raped her, and then stole $49 from her, and walked on. So Kitty Genovese, true story, absolutely died. And maybe you're thinking what everyone else was thinking, because the story keeps going. It was 3:50 a.m. when someone first called the police. The police, once they were called, only took 2 minutes to arrive at the scene. About a half hour later, an ambulance carried Kitty Genovese's body away. And only then did people come out of their apartments to talk to the police. And over the next 2 weeks, police investigators learned that a total of 38 people had admitted to witnessing Kitty's murder. And that was a murder that involved 3 separate attacks over a period of 30 minutes. But people stopped admitting that they witnessed it. Because as soon as someone came up to the police and said, "Yeah, I saw the whole thing. It was well lit. It was in front of everybody," what do you think the police questions were? It obviously was, well, why didn't you do anything? So why didn't these people call the police? Why wouldn't they? Now, the answer that almost all those people gave that admitted to witnessing the murder said, I didn't do anything because I assumed someone did. I mean, we all saw it. Certainly someone had to have called, but no one called. So would you help? Would you help, or would you assume that someone else would help? And this is why we also have the Good Samaritan Law. This is the story of Kitty Genovese, and this is really important because this suggests that perhaps if you were walking by and you saw the guy getting electrocuted with Stanley Milgram, that you wouldn't necessarily help, especially if there were more people, because the presence of others actually decreases the chances that someone will help. And there's a whole bunch of research that cites this. So why wouldn't anyone call after her first scream for help? It's known as the bystander effect. And the bystander effect is this umbrella vocabulary term that's in your text. And it explains a couple of different things. But the bystander effect is the idea that if there's more people around, people are less likely to help. One of the reasons, which will be on your test, is the diffusion of responsibility. You assume someone else is going to do it. That's the diffusion of responsibility. What's social referencing? As soon as something's going on and you don't know what the hell you're supposed to do, you tend to look around at everyone else. Like, what are we supposed to do in this situation? Think of it as like when a kid hurts himself on the playground and all the other kids gather around. And they see the kid hurt, but then they start looking at each other. And that first kid that does something sets the standard for the way all the other kids, like if someone looks at the kid and they're looking at each other and some kid says, "Let's get out of here," and they start running off, everyone else does too. Like cockroaches in the light, they're gone. But if the first kid says, "Oh my goodness, are you okay?" then everyone else does too. So everyone looks around and they see maybe even someone who looks possibly dead on the street. They look around and think, no one's No one's saying anything about this. There's a dead guy in the. This is what we do here. This is all right. This is okay. I guess I'm just gonna assume that this is what we're supposed to do, and they keep going. That's social referencing, and we still do it. And remember, this is an inoculation lesson. I want you to know that if you're in trouble or you need help, to defeat the diffusion of responsibility, you're supposed to be specific. I'm about to give you gold. This could save your life someday. Because if you're in trouble, you don't just say, somebody help. You're supposed to point to someone and say, you, call 911. Yeah, I'm talking to you, man. The one in the glasses and the red tie that's wearing a skirt. Anyway, I didn't mean to make that funny. I'm not good at improv. So that is the diffusion of responsibility and the bystander effect. So when you are in trouble or you need help, be specific as possible. I even have classes with a whole bunch of students, and you'd think the classes with more students, I'd have more students raising their hand than I would have in smaller classes just because there's more students. But that's not the case. When I have a class full of students, fewer students raise their hand than in smaller classes because it's just so much easier to blend into the background the more students there are. It's pretty amazing stuff. So the Good Samaritan Law came up because of Kitty Genovese. And nowadays, if you can help someone and you don't, and specifically, if you can help someone without putting yourself into danger and you don't, you can be held accountable legally for that person's fate. To some extent, it always boils down to how good's your lawyer. But basically, if you could just simply, call the police and you didn't and you saw it, you don't have to break up a fight. I'm not expecting you to walk into an alleyway like, hey guys, put the knife down. Stop harassing that. Put the knife down. Put the knife down. No one's asking you to do that. But at the same time, if you could help without putting yourself into danger, you should. That's the Kitty Genovese story. And that's pretty upsetting, right? But my question is, do you blame Kitty Genovese? Is it her fault that she got stabbed? And this is a pretty controversial question because I'd like to believe most people would say, no, it's not her fault that she got stabbed. But some people say, yes, it is her fault. What justification do people believe it's Kitty's fault? Because what is she doing alone at 3:30 in the morning, walking alone at night? Was that her fault? Yet some people do want to blame Kitty for this. Why? Well, this is known as attribution. This is something we're going to talk about. Attribution is an amazing thing in social psychology, and it basically means where do you put the blame, where do you put the credit, who are you aiming at for why certain things happen, because for some reason as human beings, we like to attribute things as happening because of something else. You have to have a cause and you have an effect. There has to be a cause for the effect. That's the idea of attribution. So one of these horrible things is we have a tendency to blame the victim. And I want you to be honest with yourself. Imagine you're in a jury and you see a defendant come in wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. Their ankles are cuffed, their wrists are cuffed together. And you don't even know the story yet, but someone asks you, innocent or guilty? You haven't even heard the story yet, but if you had to guess, what do you think most people say? Most people say guilty. Why? Because why would they be in a jumpsuit if they were innocent? You see a dent in someone's car. Whose fault is that dent? You assume, oh, it's that person. They're a bad driver. That's the idea of attribution. We tend to blame the victim. Let's get a little uncomfortable, and I hate saying this, but rape. Who do people blame? When someone gets raped, what are some of those horrible questions that get asked? Like, what were you wearing? Well, who was she out with? How much did she have to drink? Or he had to drink, right? It's all this idea of blaming the victim. But why would we do something like that? Because that seems completely unnecessary. What has to do with something known as the just world hypothesis. We all love to believe that we live in a world where bad things only happen to bad people and good things only happen to good people because that helps us sleep at night. But is that the world in which we live? Do we live in a world where bad things happen to good people? Of course. Do we live in a world where good things can happen to bad people? Can cheaters prosper? Well, not in my class, but outside of my class, can cheaters prosper? Potentially, right? So we're going to go on with this because I have more questions for you. And I'm going to be cut off in a bit because our 15 minutes is almost up for this one. But I want to talk about the fundamental attribution error. I'm going to leave you with this question. What if you see a construction worker drop a